Today we're going over 13 players you need to run and grab right now before your league mates do and use these guys against you, because that is not going to be fun when they beat you, okay? If you guys are brand new to this channel, by the way, consider hitting that subscribe button and also dropping a thumbs up on this video at the end if you did enjoy. We're on the road to 2,500 subs. I just want to thank you once again for hitting 2,000. Also, the support recently has been unbelievable. Much love for real. Anyways, Romeo Dobbs is number 1 on this list, okay? A few weeks back, we noticed that Romeo Dobbs was receiving more playing time than Jayden Reed, especially while Christian Watson was out. We figured that it would be a better option to have Dobbs over the long term, and so far, that's paid out for us. In week number 4, Dobbs played on 50 out of a possible 57 offensive snaps and led the team in targets with 13. The interesting takeaways, other than the snap count in this game, number 1 is that Christian Watson only played on 45% of offensive snaps in this game. Going forward, Christian Watson is going to be that number 1 receiver, so that workload will only be increasing. Number 2 is that Jayden Reed only played on 38 out of a possible 57 snaps and had 5 targets in this game in the first game that Christian Watson was back on the field. So what I want to do in this situation is go after the main 2 wide receivers, the 2 most consistent wide receivers on this team. And so far, that is looking like Christian Watson and Romeo Dobbs. All right, the Packers, for the majority of this game, looked horrible. All right, they came back at the end. Jordan Love almost put together a nice little comeback. It is what it is. Aaron Jones barely got any work. A.J. Dillon struggled this game once again. He has been just nothing but awful this year. Luke Musgrave left this game with a concussion, but Romeo Dobbs in this one was the one bright spot. And going forward, I do see Romeo Dobbs being fantasy viable, and I also see Christian Watson, of course, emerging as that number 1 wide receiver that he was last year when his snap count increases. Romeo Dobbs is a must-add this week, at the top of my list for sure. Next up, we have Michael Wilson, rookie wide receiver on the Arizona Cardinals. 7 catches for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns on 7 targets this Sunday against the 49ers. This was a blowout game in favor of the 49ers. They were up 21-3 in the blink of an eye, and this obviously led to the Arizona Cardinals having to pass the ball a lot more than they normally would, okay? Right now, Michael Wilson is averaging 2.3 yards per route run this season, which is ranking only behind Puka Nacua in terms of rookies that have ran at least 50 routes, which is a very impressive stat. He played on 50 out of a possible 71 offensive snaps in this game, which was only behind Marquise Brown, who is the clear number 1 wide receiver in Arizona, and he was only 4 snaps behind Rondale Moore, who is arguably right now the wide receiver number 2 in this offense. If I'm choosing the rest of the season, though, I do have to give the slight edge to Michael Wilson at this point just because of how much promise he's showing already in his rookie season. Now, don't forget, the Arizona Cardinals heading into this season were not expected to win a lot of games, and I'm sure they're still not expected to win a lot of games, but Joshua Dobbs is actually playing a lot better than people expected, all right? But what does this mean? If they're not expected to win a lot of games, it means they're going to be down a lot. It means they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more, which will then in turn create more opportunities, hopefully, for Michael Wilson. These next 3 games that the Cardinals play against, they're playing against the Bengals, who have been absolutely god-awful. Normally, that would be a tough matchup. They have been god-awful this year. The Rams and the Seahawks. These all have potential, though, to be high-scoring games. So Michael Wilson could get involved here in the next couple of weeks and into the rest of the season. At number 3 here, we have Tyler Boyd. All right, T. Higgins exited the game on Sunday against the Tennessee Titans just before halftime. He hurt his rib. He was on pace for, I wouldn't say a good game. He was on pace for a decent game. He had 2 catches for 19 yards. Who knows what would happen in the second half if he stayed in. This is just a simple case of me grabbing the next guy up here on waivers. All right, the Cincinnati Bengals, it's no shock or it's no surprise that they are struggling right now. Joe Burrow is clearly not himself. That calf is clearly bothering him still. Jamar Chase is not on the same page with him right now. He is upset with the team, and I don't blame him. But Tyler Boyd is usually involved in this offense, whether T. Higgins is on the field or not. All right, he's not your normal wide receiver 3, I'd say. Most teams, they only use the main 2 guys, but Tyler Boyd can get involved in this offense, and he showed that in the past a lot of times. Obviously, his workload is going to get ramped up if T. Higgins misses time here, which he is expected to. In week number 4, Tyler Boyd was on the field for 48 out of a possible 53 offensive snaps. So you can expect this guy to be on the field almost every single play heading forward. As a whole, though, I'm not confident in the Bengals. I'm really not at this point. They've gotten blown out 2 out of the 4 games so far. That's 50% of the games were disgusting, nasty losses. You cannot be losing 27-3 to the Tennessee Titans, who have a terrible passing defense. Their only good thing about their defense is their run defense, which they struggled running and passing. So that is just, it's not looking too good for the Bengals right now. I will say, scoop up Tyler Boyd if you need a fill-in for T. Higgins in the next couple of weeks, or if you need a little flex play, Tyler Boyd's not the worst option. CJ Stroud is the next person on this list. We are seeing some amazing things from CJ Stroud right now in fantasy football-wise. If we look at the box score here, you're going to see that he only went 16 for 30. You're thinking, okay, that's pretty mid, all right? He's a pretty mid quarterback. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. He threw for 306 yards and 2 touchdowns in a game where they were winning the entire time from the very beginning. That's the amazing part. So even when the Texans are winning games, you can still count on CJ Stroud to throw the ball a good number of times. If we compare this to other teams, such as the Eagles or the Lions with Jalen Hurts last year, or Jared Goff this year, when they get up in games, they can just run the ball over and over and over. You saw that on Thursday night with David Montgomery. You'll see that in Eagles games heading forward, I'm sure, with DeAndre Swift, because they have great offensive lines. They don't have to throw the ball throughout the entire game. The Texans, however, do not have a great offensive line. They do not have a great running back, or a great running game, I should say. So they're going to have to pass the ball even when they're winning. That's such an underlooked fantasy trait, and CJ Stroud has that trait right now on this team. After 3 straight weeks of 20-plus fantasy point performances, it's kind of hard to keep ignoring CJ Stroud and the production that he is giving fantasy owners right now. If you have someone like Joe Burrow or Trevor Lawrence especially, grab CJ Stroud and put him at least on the bench. I am urging you to do this. Now, I will say these next couple of games are pretty rough in terms of matchup-wise, but CJ Stroud can be a solid replacement going forward. By the way, Nico Collins had a massive game. Tank Dell, I told you before, these wide receivers are going to be on and off. It's going to be a Nico Collins game, then it's going to be a Tank Dell game. We'll throw in a Robert Woods game every now and then. That's the only problem here with the wide receivers. You don't know who's going to go off. So just keep that in mind heading forward. Next player up on this list is Joshua Dobbs. Dobbs is a little bit of a sleeper. I will say not a lot of people are batting an eye at Joshua Dobbs and realizing what he's doing over here, but I am. All right, past 3 games now, he has averaged 21.8 fantasy points, thrown for 4 touchdowns in those games. But the really intriguing part for me is that he runs the ball a lot. He's actually increased his rushing attempts every single game that he's played in this season. Now, as we mentioned earlier when we were talking about Michael Wilson as well, Dobbs' next 3 games are all pretty tough opponents where they should have to throw the ball a lot. Cincinnati, Los Angeles Rams, and then the Seattle Seahawks. Another thing I'm very impressed about with Joshua Dobbs is that he handled the Cowboys and the 49ers defenses very well in back-to-back games the past 2 weeks. If you can get by those 2 defenses, I'd say you can really get by anybody in the league. So it's looking pretty good for the Cardinals, especially because they were expected to do nothing this year. Joshua Dobbs is proving a lot of people wrong. Although they're not winning, he's still having good fantasy games. Next up, we have Jake Ferguson. For the tight end position especially, Jake Ferguson is, I'd probably say, top 5 for consistency-wise on target share. In this Week 4 game against the New England Patriots, Peyton Hendershot was their other tight end. He was inactive, so Jake Ferguson was getting a little bit more work on the third down chances. Also, this was a blowout game, though, so he didn't really play as many snaps as he normally would, especially in that fourth quarter. I don't know if he played any snaps in the fourth quarter. He played on a total of 39 out of 70 snaps on offense, and he still managed to lead this team in targets, which is very impressive. I really do think he's a great add for the rest of the season. I think he's going to be a top 10 tight end the rest of the season, especially these next 2 weeks. Great matchups against the 49ers and the Chargers. These 2 games should not be blowouts where the Cowboys defense, they win the game 38-3. I don't see that happening against these 2 teams that can put up a lot of points. So Jake Ferguson should be a solid option going forward. Next guy up here, we have Curtis Samuel. Weirdly enough, the Commanders put together probably their best performance of the year so far against Philadelphia Eagles. Really doesn't surprise me. I kind of figured this would be a close game, divisional matchup. They beat the Eagles last year when they were undefeated. So I knew they were going to come out here and give it their all. Samuel ended with 7 catches for 51 yards on 8 targets and snuck into the end zone on a little 1-yard run here. Jahan Dotson, once again, ran more routes in this game, but he is so much less effective at actually catching balls than Curtis Samuel has been. Although Terry McLaurin, I do have to say, is the clear #1 wide receiver in Washington right now, Samuel could be a little sneaky pickup. I will say there's a lot of players that are on bye week number 5. So if you need a little flex option, Curtis Samuel might not be the worst. So far, he's averaging 10.7 PPR fantasy points through 4 games. And I could easily see him improving through the rest of the season, becoming a key piece in this Commanders offense that's kind of lacking that spark. At least the first 3 games, I should say, kind of lacking that spark. Next player on this list, we have Taj Spears. I will say Derrick Henry did have a great bounce back game that was kind of expected in this one. He was not going to get 2.0 PPR fantasy points again, but I'm still intrigued by Taj Spears. This was a blowout game where Derrick Henry had a ton of fantasy points. Spears was only outsnapped in this one by 4 plays. I think he really holds a good amount of standalone value as well right now. He had 5 rushes in this one for 40 yards, 3 catches for 18 yards. He's averaged over 6 yards per carry in 3 out of 4 games so far. I really think if this game wasn't as out of hand as it was, I think that Taj Spears probably would have outsnapped Derrick Henry once again. At the very least, I'll say go get Taj Spears if you have Derrick Henry on your fantasy team, because he is an elite level handcuff player at the moment. If there was ever a week that Derrick Henry misses time, doesn't play, I think Taj Spears is a locked and loaded running back #1 on your team. I really do. I think he's that good as a backup. Next up, we have Jeff Wilson Jr. This is a very interesting one in my eyes because a lot of people are going to come out right away and say, listen, Devon Achane is playing out of his mind right now. Raheem Mostert's also playing very good right now. So where does Jeff Wilson even stand? He's going to get a chance to prove himself. The question is, what is he going to do with that chance? I feel like you pick up Jeff Wilson Jr. for 2 reasons. Number 1, if Devon Achane eventually takes over that #1 role, he could slip right behind him into that #2 role. I don't think Mostert's role right now is locked and loaded by any means. If he struggles, a couple of weeks in a row, Jeff Wilson, he might get some more looks there. Number 2 would be if either of these guys gets injured throughout the year. All right, Jeff Wilson in 2022 had a solid season. He had over 15 fantasy points in multiple games, and I feel like it's never a bad idea to bet on a Miami Dolphins player to eventually score some points. Next up, we have Chuba Hubbard. 13 carries for Miles Sanders. It was a dreadful performance for fantasy managers who started Miles Sanders. Couldn't get anything going on the ground at all. And I know he was questionable heading into this game. I realized, but it was still horrible, right? Hubbard had a little bit better of a day. He had 41 rushing yards, 2 catches for 12 yards in this game. He also outsnapped Miles Sanders by 6 snaps and ran more routes in this game. I will say going forward, I think this backfield is going to be extremely difficult to gauge and very frustrating on a weekly basis on who is going to perform better. Since the start of the season, since the offseason, I have been very low on Miles Sanders. I'll say I really didn't believe that he was going to carry all his Philly efforts into Carolina, and so far, that's been true for the most part. I don't mind having Chuba Hubbard on my bench, though. Just keeping an eye on him, just seeing what he performs as. If Miles Sanders misses any time, Chuba Hubbard, not the worst option in the world. He catches a lot of passes. In PPR, he's going to be a solid option. Last player we're going to actually deep dive into before we get 2 honorable mentions here. We have Jameson Williams. Just got his gambling system so he's eligible to play in week number 5 against the Carolina Panthers. This Lions team so far has been playing great through 4 weeks. And they've been heavily leaning on the running game with David Montgomery, also including Sam Laporta a lot in this offense. Jameson Williams is their first-round pick from 2022, and he should easily be the most talented wide receiver in his class. Amon-Ra is performing well through 4 games, but what I do have to say, my only concern right now is what we talked about earlier with the Lions running the ball a lot when they have the lead. There might not be a ton of opportunities for Jameson Williams to get a ton of targets. All right, we saw last season Amon-Ra was getting target after target after target in this offense. This year, it's a little bit different. Their offensive line is really carrying them. Amon-Ra is performing good, but it's not great. It's not amazing. So I'm really intrigued to see how two solid wide receivers perform in an offense like this where they are so heavily relying on the run game thus far into the year. Regardless, I think he should be added. At least stash him on your bench. See what he does this year. And our two honorable mentions today, we're starting it off with Cam Akers. We already saw that in the first game that Cam Akers was active here. He took up a good chunk of Madison's role. I think you need to have Cam Akers added. He's added in a lot of leagues. He's over the 50 percentile mark that I used to make these videos in these waiver wire pickups. I'm just saying if Cam Akers is somehow on your waiver wire, pick him up, stash him, because he could turn into the #1 running back on this team eventually. Last but not least, Jaleel McLaughlin. He had 7 carries for 72 yards, and he had 3 catches for 32 yards and a touchdown against the Chicago Bears. Jameson Williams got hurt very early in this game. He's expected to not even miss 1 week, I believe it was. And then you still got Samaje Perine right there. So I'm not running out and grabbing him with all my waiver wire dollars by any means. I'd keep an eye on him for these next coming weeks because Javonte has been playing like absolute crap, and Samaje Perine hasn't been doing anything as well. He did play well against the Bears, but like I said, there's just too much going on in this backfield right now. I can't really trust anybody, so I'm not going out spending all my money on him. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure, as always, drop a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.